So, when you look at these critical paths to success, Kyle, what habits or step do most people skip? Where do they trip themselves up? Like, what are the blind spots that they have that they are not considering?
A lot of the blind spots that people bump into, we've addressed in the sense that they aren't actually thinking about what has to go right in order to accomplish a goal. When they aren't actually multiplying out the odds of each of those things happening, they're typically averaging. They're saying, I feel pretty good about each of these things individually, so I feel pretty good about the goal. But if you need all of those things to go right, you can't average. You have to multiply, and that'll totally change the numbers. And many times it will take it from a predicted success to a predicted failure. So those are some blind spots. Most people aren't stopping to consider potential bad outcomes. Most people aren't stopping to try to think of how can I thwart these bad outcomes? How can I make them less likely to happen? One more blind spot that I think a lot of people get themselves in trouble with is their decision making. When you don't have a success diagram, you often make decisions without needed context. When you have a success diagram of here's what needs to go right in order for me to accomplish my goal, here's what could go wrong, decisions become a lot simpler. If I'm considering should I hire freelancer number one or freelancer number two, I can look at that diagram. I can look at the steps that are coming up. I can look at the potential bad outcomes and ask myself the question, which one of these people is going to have a better impact on this diagram? Which one of these people are going to maybe help me overcome some of these potential bad outcomes? Now I'm not thinking arbitrarily of just which one do I like more, which isn't really related to my goal necessarily, or which one of these people do I have more in common with. When we're talking about, maybe a graphic design freelancer, you don't necessarily need them to become your closest friend. You need them to help you accomplish this goal. So having a success diagram creates a context for our decisions that makes sure that every choice that we make is putting us in a stronger position. Without that, a lot of times we're one bad decision away from failing at a goal.
Yeah, and I imagine that it keep you really focused on the KPIs and what really matters.
It certainly can. Absolutely.
Yeah. And what about intuition? Because that also can play a positive or a negative role in decision making. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Give me an example. Unpack that for me.
So, for example, let's just go with what you just mentioned. You're hiring a freelance designer.
Sure.
You might feel drawn to one over the other, and you may not be able to pinpoint why exactly. You just like that person, and you just feel like they'd be a good addition to your team. Is that something that we can incorporate into our decisions?
Yeah,
Or yeah.
absolutely. I think a lot of times our gut is telling us things that our unconscious mind hasn't shared with our conscious mind. So a lot of times when people say go with your gut, it's because part of your brain has sort of figured out the answer. It just hasn't figured out how to articulate it in a way where you can then say, okay, this is why this is a good idea. But we kind of know deep down, I think this is a good idea. I think that's a big part of it. I think that's a big part of setting our intentions or manifesting goals is when we draw our focus to a specific outcome that we want in life, we start to notice things that we weren't noticing otherwise. We're bombarded with so much input every day, and we don't necessarily notice, until we call out the goal of I'm trying to maybe start this business. I'm going to need a really good graphic designer for this to work. Well, all of a sudden, we start to pay more attention in a conversation when somebody mentions that one of their friends is a graphic designer, or when somebody mentions that they just went through a hiring process for a graphic designer. We're able to lean into that a little bit more. So, your intuition, those gut feelings, are very powerful. The important thing is to train your gut to give it a context for making these decisions
Mhm.
where what you're thinking about in the shower, what you're thinking about even while you're asleep, what your unconscious mind is ruminating on is the context of this specific goal. What has to go right? What could go wrong? How you can optimize your odds of success. When you're doing that, I think your gut's going to give you better answers versus if we're just making that decision independent of any real context.
Great answer. Something else that you write about in the book is resilience and the importance in sticking with things, regardless of, well, even if you do face a lot of challenges and failed attempts. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I don't encourage people to stick with goals that are probably going to fail. I actually encourage people to put those goals on pause in favor of goals that are more likely to succeed. I mentioned earlier how a book deal might create a variety of opportunities. So if I'm trying to, for example, win over a client that, just I can't seem to get my foot in the door with this big organization, for some reason they don't see the fit or they're worried that I don't have what it takes, it might be wise for me to pursue a different goal for the time being, like getting on some podcasts, getting a book deal, writing an article for HBR, things that I've done before, and then go back to that goal now that I have more advantages and a better chance of success. Where resilience is really important is when it looks like your odds are good, but the road to success is hard. That's absolutely a time where it's incredibly important to do what you can to stick with it, because at that point, the biggest threat to your success is simply giving up too soon.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a threat that derails a lot of goals. I think there are a lot of things that we could have accomplished had we stuck with it, and maybe we didn't. One of the nice things about quitting, though, is it is a potential bad outcome. It is something that you can address in probability hacking. We talked about running a marathon. You might wake up without a lot of motivation that day. Well, there's things you can do about that if you identify that as a real risk. And so, one thing that I think is really intelligent, Jeff Hayden, he's a columnist for Inc. I talk about this in the book. He has something called the 2 week rule. He says that if you are going to pursue a goal that you're considering pursuing it, he says try for 2 weeks without making any big financial investments. Don't, if you're trying to start a t-shirt company, don't go buy a screen printing press. Don't go make a big financial investment, but try to pursue it for 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, stop and take a look around and see if you still feel motivated to accomplish this. See if this was just maybe kind of a spurt, just an idea that kind of came through your head, a flash in the pan, so to speak, or see if this is something where there is a deeper well of
Hmm.
motivation for you to tap
Hmm.
into. I think that 2 week test is very smart, and I think it is important. Part of resilience is doing what you can to reduce your odds of quitting. When it came to the marathon, we talked about finding a running partner. There's certainly other things you can do as well. Part of resilience also, though, is being intentional about the goals we choose and trying to choose goals that aren't going to be so punishingly difficult that we're going to want to quit. I used
Yeah.
to run a subscription stationery business with my wife, and every month we needed to have a new box of stationery ready to send out to our subscribers. And the goal was to get people to write more handwritten letters. We had research that showed that that could be really rewarding, both for them and for the recipient who was maybe used to getting bills in the mail. So we would send people some cards with some prompts and say, use this card to reconnect with an old friend. Use this card to say thank you to someone who had an impact on you. Use this card to check in with someone who you know has been having a hard time. And it was great. We had happy customers. It was a lot of fun. But that goal was challenging because every month we had to have a new box ready. And my wife was doing a lot of the calligraphy. We needed to have new cards made, printed. There was just very little margin for error. And so, because of that, if one of us got sick in a month and there's just the two of us running this business, that was a big problem. If we
Hmm.
wanted to go on a vacation that month, if it was the holidays, if we had some kind of family commitment or work commitment, it was really difficult. So, what we ultimately realized was we had started a business that had a model that was hard to stick with because it
Yeah.
wasn't in alignment with our lives. It wasn't in alignment with our routines or with our capacities, given that we both had full-time jobs outside of this company. So we ended up shutting that down. And one of the things I learned from that was to choose business goals or side hustle goals that had a model that made sense for me. So one of the things
Yeah.
I did after that, I started a website that reviewed e-learning platforms like Masterclass and Skillshare. What was great about that website is since the traffic was coming in from SEO, I could take a month off and that was okay.
Mm.
I still had Google sending me traffic, and then when I had time to invest, I would invest. That model made a lot of sense. I have a course about how to write for major publications like HBR and Fast Company. I only sell that course a couple of times a year. So I learned from having a monthly subscription business that that was a tough goal to stick with. It was easier to have a goal that I could check in with a few times a year and still see great financial success. So a big part of resilience, it's not, there is a grit component to it, but a lot of it just comes with don't choose a goal
Yeah,
that
be
you're going
smart
to have a
about it.
really low chance of sticking with.
Yeah, yeah. It has to be sustainable.
Sure, 100%.
Yeah, and not
100%.
too high investment that you burn out or you quit because it
Yeah, that's
takes too much
exactly
work.
right. That's exactly right. And I think
Yeah.
that 2 week test is a great way to get a sense of how likely you are to go the distance. If after, if I had done that with a subscription box, if I had tried to get a box together on the actual timeline that I would have needed to do it every month, I think I would have realized very quickly, oh, this is going to be hard to stick with. Instead, I went and got a bunch of customers and had
Mm.
people expecting things from me.
Okay. Interesting. So it's good that you got that insight earlier than later.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, yeah, great.